This is Amanda Masaris, and today I'll be presenting Film Noir, the Zoot Suit Riots, and the Hollywood Blacklist. So film noir's literal meaning is dark film in French, and this was a post-World War II U.S. film genre of the late 1940s to early 50s. And film noirs typically portrayed like a criminal underworld and typically had cynical characters, and the scenes had like stark expressionistic lighting, and they tend to have like intricate plots and an underlying existential philosophy, which reflected the pessimism and disenchantment felt among Americans after the bloodshed of World War II. And they also tended to be in like an urban setting with dramatic angles, and the close-ups of the people would give like a sense of claustrophobia. So some popular character tropes of film noirs. One was the war veteran who returns home to find that America, like the America that he fought for, is no longer the same. And people are cold, efficient, modernized, and unfazed by political corruption and organized crime. The heroes in noirs generally tend to be morally ambiguous, fatalistic, and quite alienated from society. And noir women were generally femme fatales, which is kind of like that trope of, I think it means like Spider Woman or something like that. They're generally sexually attractive, ruthless, and manipulative towards men to get what they want. So here are just a few of the more popular film noirs of like the I think these are all from the 40s, and then like the latest is from 1950. And these include John Huston's The Maltese Falcon, Billy Wilder's Double Indemnity, Alfred Hitchcock's Spellbound, Jacques Tourneur's Out of the Past, and Sunset Boulevard. I believe that one's also by Jacques Tourneur. And this film trend waned towards like the mid-50s, but the influence of it can still be found in more modern films. One that I can think of is Ridley Scott's Blade Runner from 1982. So film noir took significant inspiration from hard-boiled fiction. And this is a type of fiction that started in the 1920s. It was like an unsentimental and like tough style of American detective fiction. So like quite different than like Sherlock Holmes. And the invention of the style was credited to Dashiell Hammett, who was a former detective and contributor to pulp magazines. And Chester Himes was also another contributor, and he applied the hard-boiled techniques to his detective novels. And one of them, Cotton Comes to Harlem, as you can see in the corner. This is like a still from the film that came out in 1970. So this one's actually in color compared to the film noirs from before. Next, we have the Zoot Suit Riots of Los Angeles, California. And the Zoot Suit Riots were a series of conflicts that occurred between June 3rd to June 10th, 1943. And this conflict happened between the U.S. servicemen who were docked and the Mexican American youths who self-named them Pachucos. So Pachucos were members of an underground subculture of young Mexican Americans who rebelled against both Mexican and American cultures. They were known for wearing zoot suits, which were these loose-fitting suits, as you can see on the right here. And these suits were originally made popular by African American jazz musicians, one being Cab Calloway. And they were especially popular between like the 1930s and 40s. And it wasn't just Mexican Americans who were wearing them. We had people of all races wearing them originally, and they were seen as like very stylish, for the time. While originally the zoot suits were really trendy among American youth of all races, the public perception of them changed during World War II. Because of how much fabric that they use, it started to become seen as like excessive, and wartime rationing required like the use of wool to be held back to go towards the servicemen. So then wearing zoot suits was now deemed unpatriotic. And while a lot of people stopped wearing them, the Pachucos of LA refused to change their style and they continued to wear the zoot suits, which prompted racially motivated attacks by white nationalists who they were like already enraged by the influx of Mexican workers who had been filling the jobs that were vacated by those serving in the US military. And so now they were deeming these people who are still wearing the zoot suits and like ignoring the regulations as un-American. So here's a photo of like the aftermath of some of the violence. You can see a man in the middle who had been stripped of his clothing, looking kind of beaten, and then another laying down next to him who also looks like he was assaulted. So basically the white servicemen would go around assaulting anyone in the street who they saw wearing a zoot suit. But some white Americans were still wearing the zoot suits, but for some reason they were not targeted. It was particularly Mexican Americans, African Americans, and Filipinos. And then also the propaganda began to spread in the media, which further inflamed tensions. And in the media, they were labeling Mexican Americans as like dangerous hoodlums and like gang members and stuff like that. There was a local paper who even printed an article describing on like how to de-zoot a zoot suiter. And so basically the attackers would strip off the men's clothing in public, beat them, and then often urinate on or burn the suits. There were more than 150 people injured, and over 500 Mexican Americans were arrested on charges such as rioting or vagrancy. And obviously they were the ones who were attacked, not the attackers. The people who were attacking them were not arrested, and even police joined in on this assault, and none of anybody who was white faced any repercussions. So here's an overall timeline of the riots. The very start of it is estimated around August of 1942, so the prior year. There was a man named Jose Diaz who was murdered at a party where zoot suiters were attending. And it was thought to be gang violence among Pachucos. So the LAPD rounded up more than 600 Mexican American men and women, and many of them were tried and convicted of murder. And this is where those racial tensions begin to increase as the media portrays the zoot suiters as dangerous gang members. And so the actual riots began June 3rd, 1943, so the following summer. And this started when a group of sailors claimed to have been attacked by a group of zoot suiters. And thousands of white servicemen in California then began to hunt them and beat anyone up with a zoot suit, burn their suits. And then, as I said before, Filipinos and African Americans were also targeted. So it became more of a race riot more than, specifically about the suits. And LAPD and the media continued to encourage violence. They promoted false stories about the zoot suiters. The servicemen who were injuring these people were portrayed as heroes, while the victims were referred to as members of like a Mexican crime wave. On June 7th, we have like the height of the violence. Civilians began to join in, and they attacked not just people who were wearing the zoot suits, but just anybody who was a minority. So obviously this was more fueled by race than by clothing. And then June 8th is when the violence begins to wane because the military police step in to help like patrol the city. And then also, I believe on like June 9th, the suits were actually made illegal to wear in LA, like at least in public. And so because people weren't able to wear the suits, then I guess it helped wane the attacks. And then by June 10th, that's when most of the rioting had largely ended in LA. But there were also smaller incidents that continued to happen in other parts of the country where people were protesting it and everything like that. So here we have a few photos of the events of the time. And in the top left corner, you can see this car of, it looks like mostly white men. And these were some of the servicemen and maybe some civilians, I'm not sure, who were like proudly showing some of the clothing they had ripped off of the Zoot Suiters. And then to the right of that, you can see many Mexican Americans lined up. Looks like probably going to jail. And then in the bottom left, you can also see many people wearing their suits, also becoming imprisoned. So here's another slide. These photos are obviously more recent. I just couldn't help but be reminded of more recent events. And you can take what you want from these photos and see if anything looks or sounds familiar. And I think the top left photo is a photo of the Proud Boys. And I think this was around the time of the January 6th insurrection. And then I believe the other 3 photos are all taken within like the last year since the beginning of the Trump administration. And you can see many Hispanic Americans being deported and assaulted by federal agents. And then the bottom left is a very notable photo of Kristi Noem and the inhumanity that is seen behind her. Okay, so next we have the Hollywood Blacklist. And just for a little bit of background, in the 1940s and 50s, there was something called the Red Scare, which was in the US was a period of intense fear of a supposed rise of communist and socialist ideologies. And so this led to blacklists springing up, like that fear of like infiltration from communist spies, and anyone suspected of supporting leftist ideologies were blacklisted. And this made it hard for the blacklisted individual to get work. It caused many people to get fired, some even arrested, like we're about to see. And the blacklists were mostly associated with Hollywood, but blacklisting happened in many other fields as well. Like teachers were blacklisted, and I can't think of everything, but many different fields were also affected by this. So most notable from the blacklist were the Hollywood 10. And so this started in 1947 when the House Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC, they began to investigate Hollywood, seeking to purge the country of any communist influences. The goal was to prove that there were communists in the Screenwriters Guild that were capable of inserting communist propaganda into the Hollywood films. And so this is where the Hollywood 10 comes in. So there were 10 people who refused to testify. They denounced this practice as violating the First Amendment. And they became known as the Hollywood 10 because they were the first to be blacklisted by Hollywood studios. And Hollywood began to blacklist individuals as a show of patriotism in the face of public attacks, and also to help shield the rest of the film industry from economic harm. And so I have listed here the 10 members of the Hollywood 10. They were a majority of screenwriters, and then there was one person who was a screenwriter and producer, and then there were 2 directors that were blacklisted. So all 10 of these people received prison sentences, and most of them served between 6 to 12 months. Here's just a couple of photos that I was able to find. I wasn't able to find images of the entire 10 altogether, but we do have on the left here, we have 7 of them arriving in the U.S. federal court, and that was in 1950. So you can kind of see what they looked like. And then to the right, we have people protesting to get them out of jail because, yeah, these were sympathizers with the Hollywood 10. And just to finish up, the Hollywood Blacklist was discontinued in the early 1960s as the anti-communist crusade began to calm down. And then later on, Hollywood studios commemorated the blacklists in the films The Front from 1976 and Guilty by Suspicion from 1991. All right, thank you all for watching.